Hello, this is Clay Moorhead with 360 Niagara. I'm going to show how to use Photoshop to merge brackets shot with a dual fisheye raw plug-in on the Ricoh Theta Z1 camera. Number of advantages in doing brackets. I made a bit of a list. The main advantage is being able to avoid surprises back in the studio. So let's take a look at the images I'm going to use. These were shot at a little bit after dusk in Port Colborne down by the canal. I've got a pretty complete range of exposures here. So first of all, let's take a look at the default settings that Lightroom applies. And here's something extremely important. By default, Lightroom sets sharpening to about 40 with no noise reduction. This actually adds noise to your image. Lightroom does this to all raw files. Okay, so if we increase the noise reduction to our taste and then go and increase the sharpening, we can get something that's going to work a little better and not actually add noise. I'm looking at the car and I'm looking at the details around the sign up above. I'm going to copy and paste these settings to the rest of the images in the data set. And this should apply the corrected sharpening settings to all the images. This is important. This is a very important first step. Okay, now we're going to merge to HDR, and you do not want to check the align. And notice the red patches. Those are the patches created by the deghosting setting. And you have to be careful with these. Too high a setting will actually add noise in the patch areas. So let's take a look. Pretty good detail in the street signs, and we're a little underexposed in the highlights. So I'm going to do some of my usual adjustments. Increase the exposure a bit. The pink on the taillight of this moving car is an unfortunate artifact. Merging to HDR is always going to have artifacts in some location with moving objects. So a few more adjustments to get it to my taste. I can read the details on this fish shop sign. And those old people sitting on that bench, their faces are blurred, but they were moving a bit. So I'm going to go to the detail. I'm going to tweak the sharpening settings again. These came in from the source images. Actually going to increase the sharpening here. And the important setting is masking. Masking constrains the sharpening to edges. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is stitch this. And a couple settings to change the yaw and the nadir. Here's a little trick. If you put your cursor on the slider in any of the adjustments and just scroll your wheel mouse, you'll get a dynamic movement. Okay, the next process is I'm going to merge these to HDR Pro in Photoshop. Now, unfortunately, you don't get to not align the images in this process, so I've marked up the images a little bit in Photoshop. to give the alignment something to key off. Okay, select my data set and edit in Merged HDR Pro in Photoshop. It's going to open up Photoshop, bring everything in on layers. It's going to do the alignment, which is fine because I have those marks on the image. And it's going to give me a rough adjustment. This is actually more for preview than anything else. I'm going to get a high bit depth file out of this, higher than just merging to HDR in Lightroom. Say OK. And the finished result is going to look a little bit different than what you saw in the preview in the last panel. Okay, and I'm going to make some adjustments on this. And again, you don't have to worry about the marks outside the stitch area. Crank up the exposure, all the usual stuff. Watching the histogram. Increase the clarity a little bit. And this is mostly a matter of taste. I don't like plasticky looking HDR or overcooked HDR. I do, however, want to decrease the highlights a little bit here until the sign on the fish shop looks somewhat reasonable. And I'm going to have to make other adjustments to the exposure of the shadows to compensate. Okay, so we're going to stitch this. And you can stitch to 8-bit JPEG or 16-bit TIFF if you like. I like to keep the bit depth high till I'm finished all my edits. And again, the trick of putting your cursor on a slider and then just scrolling your wheel mouse. Okay, so here's my finished image. And within reason, I can make more adjustments on this if I had a preference. So let's take a look. Now note that I've got a lot more ghosting in this area. This is an unfortunate byproduct of merging to HDR Pro. So we're going to get some issues in the water reflections in the car tail light. Thanks for watching. Some ways that you can contact me on some of my channels.